Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are tuning in from. It is Candy Brown and it's Friday the 13th. I am so excited to see all of you here. I am actually just sharing this to a couple places. So let me do this real quick while we get set up for this conversation. And super excited to see you all here. So before we get into what I want to talk about today, I actually want to talk a little bit about Friday the 13th. I think it's an interesting energy, one that has always been fascinating to me, as I feel like a lot of people get caught up in this ridiculous narrative and this ridiculous notion around why they should be fearful of Friday the 13th. And so a couple years ago, it kind of fascinated me, and I wanted to find out why there was this, like, I don't know, why we had this story around Friday the 13th. And it was interesting what I came upon. And so I thought I'd share that with you a little bit first today, as we're in the energy of Friday the 13th. Before the patriarchal times and period came to play, Friday the 13th was actually a celebration of, it was called the Day of the Goddess. It was divine feminine energy. It was a really powerful day to manifest, to be in this really juicy energy and flow and allow ourselves to receive what the universe wants to offer us. It's also a time of death and rebirth. And so what I find fascinating is if you really watch the trajectory of where Friday the 13th came from and all this like ridiculous nonsense about it, there was a fear of this power, right? It actually was aligned with, if you look at the moon cycles, there's 13 moon cycles. And it really, 13 really celebrates the natural flow and the natural rhythm of a woman and her cycles, and really where that power and all comes from. And so I think about, as the patriarchal times came to play, how we somehow created this narrative that there was something dark and evil about feminine power, where feminine power lives in all of us, right? And so anyway, I wanted to start today to wish you all a happy Friday the 13th. I will tell you that since I have really understood the magic of what today has to offer, it is just a lucky day. It is just a day full of mystic and magic and wonder and manifestation. And so I hope, I just posted across my socials some information on how to really harness the energy for today. So I hope you will honor that. I just wanted to start with that. The second thing I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about sort of a revelation I had back in my corporate career. I remember the day, somebody had reached out to me and we were having a conversation and they made a comment. And many of you, especially if you're a type A, high performing, you've been successful by other people's metric or idea of what success really constitutes. Oftentimes you may have heard people be like, God, you got your shit together. You just seem like you're so confident and you're so composed and you just have this courage and this way that you show up in the world. And I remember when I had that conversation, like I said, this was back in my corporate career. This is probably about 15 years ago or so. And I was actually struggling with some things at that time. Now, mind you, I wasn't sharing what I was struggling with publicly, and especially in some of the environments I played in. I played in some good old boys environments, and emotion wasn't really one of the things that was valued in some of the organizations that I worked with. And so it wasn't like I was going to share when I was feeling challenged or when I was going through some difficult things. And I think even at that time, I was really hitting up against some things with imposter syndrome and my own value and my worth. And I was just feeling depleted and tired. And most people didn't see that on me, right? And so this person had come up to me and she's just like, God, Candy, you got your shit together. You're so composed. You just always walk into these meetings and you sit at the board table and you just are confident. And like, I just admire you so much. And I remember the thought that went through my head, and I tend to like metaphors and analogies when I'm thinking about things. And because I was in the muck when this was going on, I remember thinking, God, I'm just a freaking duck. And it kind of occurred to me, and I was like, what? Where did that come from? I'm like, I'm a duck. And I was like, oh, I'm a duck. And so what happened was I got this image. I got this like very clear picture of a duck and how a duck tends to be in the water, right? And we often look at a duck and we see the duck in the pond, and the duck on the surface looks like it's poised, looks like it's calm, looks like it's composed. But oftentimes, in order for that duck to just sit in the water like that, its legs are going a mile a minute under the water. And I've never felt like a metaphor fit so perfectly that when this person was like, God, Candy, you got your shit together. You're so confident. You're just put together. You show up in these spaces. And all I kept thinking about was, holy shit, I'm barely treading water and my legs are going a mile a minute. And all the imposter syndrome and all the shit and all the narrative and all the stuff was coming at me. Yet I still had to show up and do my job, and I had to lead my team and the work that I was doing. And I think about, and it's carried through in the work that I do now and the work that I've done over the last decade with the leaders that I work with, is how many of us are actually really a duck. And so I think about, we've created this narrative or this culture, this expectation that says leaders got to show up, and they better show up confident, and they better show up from a place of they know what they're doing. And what I would offer to you is that's kind of a fallacy. That's not a legitimate view of what's really going on behind the scenes. I mean, I even look at social media right now. You want to talk about the biggest representation of being a duck. What we see posted and what we see 90% of the time out on social media is what I will call the A track on, it's the best hits. It's the music that people want to hear, but nobody sees the B track, right? Nobody sees what's going on behind the scenes. And oftentimes, you'll say, people will be like, oh my God, they were an overnight sensation. And you find out that they spent years and years and years and years grinding behind the scenes, dealing with imposter syndrome, dealing with a sense of not being enough or being too much, because we vacillate between those spaces for a lot of us that are showing up in the world. We have days where we're like, I don't feel like I'm enough. And we have other days where we're like, I'm tired of people telling me I'm too much, right? And so there's this imposter syndrome, and there's this opportunity where we are just questioning everything. And I will tell you, especially with the corporate leaders and the business owners that I work with, there are often times when you really get in behind the scenes with them, when you lean in and you dig in, that you find out they don't know what to do. They are just doing the best they can with what they have from where they're at, and they know that they have to take some kind of action. And so they lean in, oftentimes freaking out, legs flailing about in that pond. And they show up from a place that looks confident and composed and poised. And what I would offer to you is most leaders struggle at times with being a duck. I would offer and ask, where are you experiencing, or have you experienced feeling like a duck yourself, where there's times where you need to show up a certain way. You need to muster that courage. You need to find a way to stop the energy, the noise, the story, the narrative that's holding you back. And you got to show up anyway, right? You either got to show up for your family, you got to show up for your team, show up for your clients, show up for your community, show up for yourself. And all the time your legs are going 50 miles an hour under the water, and you're like, holy crap, I hope no one finds out that I really don't even know what the hell I'm doing right now. And I think about, I used to sit in these meetings. And again, when this person said this to me, I just sat there for a minute. And I'm like, what? I'm like, oh, thanks. I guess that's how you perceive me. But oh my God, if you only knew the conversations I had with myself behind the scenes, holy crap. How many days do I go home almost hyperventilating, thinking, shoo, man, I got through that day. I got through that scenario. Okay, we're going to hope that decision I make rides and the outcome's really good. And we sit and we hold our breath sometimes, right? I would come into these big meetings where we would get challenged and oftentimes get our ass handed to us because somebody had to have their, macho, whatever it was, narcissistic energy coming in the room, which often also instigates a whole lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of ducks going on. And by the way, I would tell you, the louder somebody does this, or the more they beat their chest, the more they probably are experiencing the duck, and that's their coping mechanism. You can really see when imposter syndrome shows up for people. They start to talk in circles. They start to get louder and bigger, and they're going to push their agenda. Yeah, they're a duck. They're not going to own that they're a duck, but they're a duck and they're fighting with imposter syndrome. And so I would go into these meetings sometimes being the only female, more times than not being the only female. So that already put me sometimes in a place where my narrative was I'm at a disadvantage, because I guarantee in some of those rooms, there were people that did not respect and value what I had to offer into the room. And so unlike many of my colleagues who were women who would sometimes sit at the back or in the corners of the room, I would come in oftentimes early. I'd belly up in the center of the table and I'd spread myself out so that I could take up space. I'm like, okay, who? And I would tell you, even in taking space, I would start to be like, I don't know if I should be taking up this much space. Do I really belong at this table? And we have all these stories in this entire conversation that's going on and on and on and on repeat sometimes. But as things would get tense and we would have some just like knockout, drag out, like sometimes I really, just as a side note, and this is why I do some of the work I do, it is really amazing and appalling at the same time to watch the dynamics of what happens behind closed doors around a boardroom, or around a table in a boardroom. When you get some leaders together and the way they move through topics, discussions, conflict, and challenges, I will tell you more times than not in those rooms, it sounds like a bunch of 5-year-olds having a little temper tantrum and screaming match. It's actually a bit ridiculous the way most meetings are run, that you either have people in the room who are in the room that don't need to be there, but because it's a posturing or peacocking or political move, they're in the room and it's a check the box to say, oh, they get to weigh in their opinion, which they don't. It's I'm going to assert my agenda and we're going to see who can talk over each other and who's going to win the fight. But it's really a pretty detrimental dynamic in most cases. And I would say that a lot of businesses and a lot of leaders have opportunity to rethink how they structure their meetings, especially their leadership team meetings. They are highly dysfunctional in most cases. And there's usually a lot of unnecessary drama, conflict, posturing, peacocking, politicking, like you name it. And so it can get very tense and you get put on the spot. I find it interesting that we do a lot of training in our teams and in our cultures around, you should criticize in private and praise in public. That is not what happens. You get thrown under the bus in some of these meetings, and then you are forced to be held accountable in a way that you're like, holy shit, what just happened? And I just got like my legs laid out from under me and thrown under a bus. Because whenever something goes wrong, they're looking for somebody needs to be a scapegoat. So you go into these meetings already freaking out sometimes going, okay, am I going to be the one that gets my ass handed to me? Or am I going to be able to escape the gaze and like hope and pray that my shit's not going to get caught out the table? So what happens is I used to sit in these meetings. I would get in and at least take up space. And then I would sit there and be like, okay, brace yourself. And one of the reasons I went into those meetings early, knowing full well that I'm a duck, was because I wanted to brace myself. I wanted to make sure I had a position where I could kind of ground myself in a space. But what would happen is these meetings would start to take off and I would be this person, kind of under the table over here. And somebody would be like, who the fuck is clicking the pen? I dropped the pen. And so I started tapping my feet under the table. I'm 5'2", so no table is my knees going to hit the table. That I literally sometimes would hold my chair and swing my legs under the table, or I would just bounce my knees or tap my foot. I still do that. I'm doing it right now, as a matter of fact. But I got really good at keeping this part of me controlled. Because again, there's an aspect and a perception that what looks like control is in power. A bunch of fucking nonsense, but that's the perception. So I would train myself to not move a muscle from the waist up. But and if I really needed to brace myself, I would hold my chair and just swing my legs. I was a duck. I will tell you, with the executives that I have done deep work with the business owners that I work with the teams, with the mid to upper level leaders, more and more people, I will tell you, hey, Barb, yeah, right. It's so true. I will tell you that any leader that actually cares, that any leader that really values leadership and is not on their little power trip and a narcissistic like egomaniac, that's a whole different conversation. Every single one of those leaders is a duck. I would offer you have had many occasions where you felt like a duck, where you're like, holy crap, I can't let people see me falter right now. I can't, because one of the things that we struggle with, especially in the corporate, but in business in general, is this concept and this energy of vulnerability. There are still too many. I remember the companies that I worked for. I remember the environments that I was in, that vulnerability was seen as an incredible weakness. And we talked about it because, again, this is the contradiction or the bullshit that gets fed is we need leaders that are vulnerable. But holy shit, if you showed vulnerability, man, you were going to get leveled. You were going to be seen as weak. You were going to be seen as a leader that didn't know how to run their teams, drive initiatives, take risk. You were a leader that, well, we're not going to give that to Candy and her team because, well, they're not emotionally equipped to handle it. We're not going to hand that to Bob and his team, well, because, he just showed that they have some weaknesses. So we talk out of both sides of our ass when it comes to business and running these meetings and showing up when everybody's duck is getting bigger in the room. And so what happens then is we do sort of this posturing and peacocking. I always call it the 3 P's of ineffective leadership: posturing, peacocking, and politicking. It's all about how am I going to sell, and sell from that kind of dirty word sales, not sales in the way that sales is meant to be, which is a love letter, by the way. We get into the space where we start pitching, we start selling. Ooh, there's a 4th P: peacocking, posturing, politicking, and pitching. We start pitching. We start one-upping each other. We start throwing other people under the bus. And what happens is that duck in us takes over, because that duck really comes from that place of imposter syndrome, from that kind of topsy-turvy seesaw of I don't feel like I'm enough, and I'm been told I need to dial it down and I'm too much, right? I mean, God forbid be a female in an all male dominated meeting where when you use your voice, your boss pulls you out on a break and says you need to dial it down. Then don't bring me to the room. I can't tell you how many times I was like, if I don't have a voice at the table, then stop inviting me to the room as a check the box exercise. If you ask a question and no one else is going to respond, and I'm the one that's closest to the field that can see what's going on, I'm absolutely going to share my thoughts and opinions around what's going on a day-to-day basis. And if you tell me that on a break, I need to run that by you first, or I need to dial that down, that's nonsense. Yet that's the kind of dynamics that are happening behind those closed doors. And we wonder then why leaders who have capability, have capacity, have heart, have emotional intelligence, why they are shrinking, or why they are feeling burnt out, feeling like they are in perpetual cycles of imposter syndrome, or why they are not showing up in the fullness of who they are, awakening, activating, and amplifying their leadership voice. So since that moment, I've really been studying leaders in a different capacity. It's the work that I do, right? It's all around leadership alignment. And it's one of the reasons that I brought human design into my work, because I really want to look at the innate wiring of how individuals operate in their energy and how they operate in the energy around us. So there's this really powerful lens that we can start to look at how to activate more of that fullness of what our leadership voice is, how we activate vulnerability in a way that actually allows us to lead at our highest and best capacity. And some of that comes through the lens of us understanding our innate wiring. Now, I did a whole lot of assessments back in the day in corporate. I mean, my God, if you've ever been in any kind of corporate Fortune 100 company, you probably have been assessment debt to death, right? Like it's the culture of assessments. Human design brings something different than just an assessment. That's a behavioral tool that's very subjective, based on a lot of outlying conditions. Some of it even being, did I get up on the right side of the bed this morning, and did I have my coffee? When we look at an energetic blueprint, an actual innate way we're wired, we can tap into a very different dynamic around what we need in terms of optimal performance, what we need in terms of how we work, rest, and play best, what we need in terms of how we communicate, engage, and resolve conflict. And so in the work with human design, I've really watched leaders be able to shift this mindset and really get into the heart of where their duckness is coming from, where that imposter syndrome kind of like takes them over. And so 2022, the whole pandemic, hit, and you want to talk about some ducks feeling like ducks. There isn't a leader who, again, I'm not talking about the narcissistic egomaniacs, that's not leadership. That's a whole different energy. I'm talking about leaders. There isn't a leader that didn't feel like a duck and isn't still feeling like a duck based on what happened through COVID and the pandemic. And for me personally, I got pulled out of my business in 2022. I had taken on a partnership or a collaboration with another entity that I thought was the right kind of partnership. And all of a sudden I felt myself right back in that corporate energy that had my nervous system outside of myself. I also at the same time had invited a group of women in my house where I wanted to have really connected conversation. I wanted us to really play in sort of a vision around our individual leadership and how collectively we could help each other and support each other. What happened in turn instead was it was like Facebook Live in my living room. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Like, it absolutely wasn't what I was trying to invite in. So I had a bit of a meltdown. I had a full on breakdown. My mom was living with me at the time, and I just had an emotional and spiritual breakdown. I felt disheartened. I felt heartbroken. I felt depleted. I felt like I was just defeated in all of what I was trying to do to bring a different kind of conversation together around leadership. And so I had met with a coach of mine who asked me, could I go somewhere? Could I recharge? Could I do some things? And I found myself going to Denver because I needed some healthy masculine energy around me. So I went to the mountains. It was supposed to be 9 days. That even was an extension of what it originally was, which I thought a long weekend. Came back and I had a leadership retreat that I was facilitating that I had already committed to for a government agency here in Texas. Did that, but every day I would wake up and go, nope, not today. Nope, not today. And what was 9 days sabbatical turned into a 2-month sabbatical. And it really kind of took me out to have a more introspective, contemplative view of the work that I was doing. Did I still want to be doing leadership alignment work? Because I got to tell you, I was really getting to a point where I'm like, and I think about, I just read recently, Simon Sinek went through something similar where he's like, I lost the passion for the work that I'm doing. And the same thing hit him around 2022. And I think a lot of us have felt that, and some of us are still feeling that disenchanted. Why am I doing this? Why do I keep trying to fight the good fight when all it does is fucking just wear me out and it feels defeating? And, I work with an organization for 3 years where we pour into building these leaders, and then somebody retires or somebody checks out and they bring in somebody else who derails everything that we've done. It's heartbreaking sometimes. And I've had people say, Candy, you get too emotionally connected to this work. And I'm like, how do you not? If the work you do is a mission, if the work you do has a cause that you're fighting for, that you see something that can be bigger in terms of, oh, Barb, I'm so glad to hear that. If you see something bigger in terms of what's possible for humanity, for consciousness, for leadership, for our own potential, how do you not get emotionally connected to that? It's our livelihood as humans, as individuals who connect and are in community with each other. Yet the more and more I looked through the lens of what was going on, the more and more I realized that we're not in community oftentimes. We don't have a culture that allows us to connect and communicate. We have a culture that complains and commiserates. We get into this negative narrative of all the things that are broken, including ourselves, and all the things that are going wrong. And we don't know how to be in communion with each other. We don't know how to be in community with each other. And so for me, I needed to go dark. I needed to get out of social media. I needed to get out of my business. Now, I had one of the most abundant seasons of my life. It's a whole different, I'll talk about that another time, how we can pull ourselves out of business and actually have more abundance than we've ever had. sad because sometimes we got to get out of our business. But that sabbatical took me out. What was interesting is I really was in this dynamic around being a duck. And I felt so ducky. Like I was just flailing about in this fucking pond. And sometimes like I'm sitting in a pond all by myself. And I even had somebody, I was doing a theta healing recently, and it broke my heart again, thinking about sometimes I feel like I'm in this pond all by myself. And so all of that was sort of that area that I spent in reflection and contemplation. And I thought, ooh, I'm going to go to Denver and I'm going to write my next book. I didn't do anything. I went up in the mountains. I spent time in the mountains. I went to a baseball game and I didn't do anything. And then I didn't do anything really for 2 months. I just pulled myself out. And so what happened was, it was right around Labor Day when I came out of this sabbatical that was not planned. And if anyone would have told me in 2022 I was taking a sabbatical, I would have told you were nuts, because I didn't have space, bandwidth, and I needed to get things moving in my business to scale and grow it to the next level. I came out with this thought around, ooh. And I remember at the beginning of the year, I always have a word or a phrase that sort of anchors me into my year. And for 2022, it was a weird thing that came through January, February that said, I'm not available. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I'm not available. Okay. I know I'm not available. What am I not available for? And it was September that I came through that sabbatical. And what came through was this verbatim was what channeled through me was, I am no longer available for anybody's version of who the fuck they think I am. I am not available for anything other than my truth and what feels like alignment for me. Hence, what became, I can't believe I just said hence. I feel like a Friends episode when Chandler's like, Joey just said hence. Anyway, side rail. Hence, my platform for Aligned as Fuck platform was birthed. It was where my podcast came to life. It was where this energy around how do we come back to the truth of who we are and this radical authenticity to be aligned as fuck so that we can awaken, activate, and amplify our unique leadership voice. And it also took me, as I was coming out of sabbatical, even deeper into the work I do in human design. It brought me back into my own energetic blueprint to say, why am I feeling? What's going on? And I got to see some of my own soul curriculum and some of the things that were showing up for me. So when I came out of that in September, I had another vision. I had a vision of wanting to create a community, wanting to create this idea, and I didn't know what it was yet. I just wanted to create a community where I could bring the renegades, where I could bring the revolutionary and visionary leaders, the leaders that were tired of being on that endless hamster wheel, or winding and grinding and burning and churning and like hustling for the muscle for the sake of what? I don't even know, an arbitrary number or the EBITDA for a company or the OP or whatever it is, right? Being operating plan. Like there's this arbitrary game we're playing that has some kind of ridiculous outcome that's all about the short term, by the way. It's not a long-term game. It's not a vision or a mission or a cause we're aiming for. It's this arbitrary target that like somebody made up some number out of thin air to get back to their shareholders, their stockholders, their whoever. But it's this ridiculous game we're in. And it's this constant, endless, perpetual loop of more of the same. And it's push more, grind more, achieve more, accomplish more. And it's just blah. Like anybody else want to just like puke it all out and be like, I'm so freaking over this. So I envision this community. I envision this community where instead of complaining and commiserating all the time, and instead of being caught in this cycle of being this duck flailing about like we think we're all by ourselves, what if these ducks came together and changed the conversation? What if, and many of you know, I talk a lot and I should have grabbed it. It's sitting over there. What if we created the new Care Bear stare? And for those of you that are not old enough to know the Care Bears, please go like find it on a video and check it out. But the Care Bears, right? They all had their little emblem on their belly that is like they're unique. One has a rainbow, one has a 4-leaf clover, my one over there has the moon and the stars because it's the Dream Care Bear. There was the original 10, then there was the Care Bear cousins. Like it became this movement of energetic beings that all had a gift themselves, that when they were activated and they were aligned as fuck, they could shine that light out and they could overcome certain challenges, obstacles, evil, right? But that power was only so big. It was when the Care Bears came together and created the Care Bear stare that they became a power that magnified, and it became an equation. Instead of 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 was 20. 1 + 1 is 200. 1 + 1 is 2,000. 20,000, 2 million, whatever. You see how that goes, that there's a collective power that increases when we come together and stop flailing about all on our own. So I had this vision, and at first I was like, oh, we're going to create the new Care Bear stare or the new Mr. Rogers neighborhood. Yes, yes, yes to all of that. But I kept coming up and I kept teasing this out with some people in my community and some of my friends and people that I mastermind with. And I kept thinking, I can't call it this. I can't call it the aligned as fuck ducks. I just love that. It just fits. And so I just started calling it the aligned as fuck ducks. Well, recently it finally occurred to me how to build this community of aligned as fuck ducks. And it's the pond. Because I think about sometimes as leaders, we think it's got to be so big and we're trying to boil the ocean, right? We're trying to go out and turn an entire ocean rather than effectively impacting our own pond, which feeds in and channels into other waterways, right? Water takes the shape of its container. It's about flow. And that pond can get bigger and that pond can move in and out in other directions. But we need a pond. We need a place to be in that conversation that as we are learning our own nuances and leadership markers and what our leadership voice represents. What is our overall purpose? What is it we're trying to do in the world? And when I work with people in the capacity of their leadership alignment, one of the questions I ask them is, what do you want to create, influence, affect, change, impact in the world? What is your living legacy and why does that matter to you? Imagine when you can get really dialed into that. And I love the way, and one of my favorite books right now is Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game. What if we had revolutionary, renegade, visionary, transformational leaders come together in a pond, in a contained environment where we can mastermind and play and connect and conversate and have these discussions about redefining leadership, bringing ourselves back home into alignment and radical authenticity. We can vision strategically these missions and purposes that we feel compelled to drive so that we're creating causes that connect us into that compelling why. And we're doing it in a collective capacity where 1 + 1 becomes 20, not 2, 200, 2,000, 2 million, et cetera, et cetera. And so I finally realized what that community is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the aligned as fuck duck pond. And so I have created a community where those leaders, where you can come to play. And the other thing that dropped in for me is I don't want it to be a one size fits all experience for everybody in that community. I want, if you remember, and I'm going to date myself here because I don't even know if they still make these, but back in the day, I loved me a good choose your own adventure book. Do you remember those where like, they're oftentimes for like these kind of picture books or whatever, but it was a choose your own adventure that you would like start to read. And then it would say, ooh, if you want to go down this rabbit hole, turn to page 27. If you want this experience, go to page 45. Now I would always go back and go do all of them, but you got to pick the way the story ended, so to speak, based on the adventure you chose. That's what I wanted to create in this community, was that you also had sort of the ability to choose your own adventure as you were coming together in a collective to play with other leaders, to engage in these really meaty conversations. And so I've built this pond. I've built the aligned as fuck duck pond for you to come in and play in the overall collective with these other revolutionary, renegade, visionary, transformational thought leaders and change agents. And witches and way showers and whatever label you want to create that, witches being warriors, igniting transformational change and healing. Oh my God, I want to call the witches out. We need to have more witches in their sorcery to do some new mystical, magical things to manifest a whole different way we go to business and lead and engage and interact and build communities and cultures and collaborate and ongoing. So you can come into the community and come into the whole community. And because I really do believe we need to look at our innate wiring and our own individual operating plans, aka your energetic blueprint or your human design, your gene keys, your quantum human design. I layer that in so that then there are sub ponds in the pond, and nothing more. Once you come in the pond, if you jump in to the pond, if you're ready to dive in, you get access to all of it. So you can be in the big pond and play with all the aligned as fuck ducks, or you can go into the individual little mini ponds where you're speaking to your people. So when we talk about the lens of human design, we're talking about then there is a manifesting magic, manifestor magic. And these are the titles of the sub ponds. Manifestor magic pond, which is all for how manifestors get to engage with other manifestors. There is the generator greatness pond. There is the Manny-Gen magnetic pond. There is the projector power pond, and there is the reflector radiance pond. So you can then go into these sub ponds and talk with other ducks who are experiencing the same things you experience because you have a natural wiring that is similar. In addition, there is training, and there is ways to engage in resources, and there is live opportunities and replays. And again, it's a choose your own adventure. So before I completely go off the rails here, because I'm just beside myself, I'm tapping into this Friday the 13th energy, and I'm just so passionate because this is the cause. This is the cause, is to start a movement of getting leaders into a space that is for leaders who want to lead in a way that feels, and this, oh my God, this all of a sudden that just brought me to tears. That want to lead something meaningful, that want to create sustainable change and redirect the ship that wherever we've been going in this thing we call business and leadership and life, because it's not our full potential of what we can be activating in this space, that real change and impact in the world. You have a cause that wakes you up, that says, I believe there is something more we're supposed to activate and tap into as humanity. That I want to be in a place space with other people that share that same heart-centered, soulful, calling. That, God, I'm tired of being this duck flailing about by myself in a pond all alone, when I'd like to. And I think about, sometimes I live in Austin, right? That when you see people go out onto the lakes, or it can be a lake pond, they bring their boats and they kind of tether up. That we get people that kind of are bringing their ponds together, that then we can create bridges to these other ponds and these lakes and these boats, so that we can create a collective energy that does really bring that new Care Bear stare to life. And so with that, I am introducing and have launched. It's really just getting its legs under it, so to speak, as we talk about the duck, is the Aligned as Fuck Duck Pond. And I invite you, if this is calling to you, if you feel any resonance with this, to join us. You have a capacity, again, to choose. You can join monthly and have it be just a monthly renewal and stay as long as you want. It's $97 if you choose to join us for the month. And again, it'll just renew unless you choose to cancel, or you can save a little and join us for the year for $9.97 and come and be part of this movement to activate and redefine a new level of leadership that is rooted and steeped in radical authenticity. It brings you back to the truth of who you are, how you operate optimally. It brings you into a space for you to be fully 100% aligned as fuck, and allow the magic and beauty of you being a duck be something you embrace and use as part of what you share in the world, rather than where some of us have been living in shame, thinking, oh my God, I'm a duck, what's wrong with me? So I want us to come together in a community where we can celebrate all of that. We can be in really rich conversation, and we can be in a play space. So a couple of the things that you're going to get as part of this community is what I'm calling monthly AMP sessions: activation, mastery, or alignment mastery play spaces. This is going to be where we get to work through some of the energetics around how we get to show up as leaders. And because I want to make this accessible for as many people as possible, I will be running an AMP session the second week of the month, twice in that week. One will be at 6 p.m. Central Time, and one will be at 10 a.m. Central Time. This is so that my people who have day jobs can join. This is so that my people in Australia and Europe can join us. This creates an opportunity for more people to be in this conversation, that if you can't be live, then there's also the replay. I also will be doing live heart seat coaching sessions the fourth week, and again, twice that week, where you can come in and ask Q&A questions. You can bring your human design chart, and we can talk about different nuances and markers inside of there. There will be training modules and themes that we will be discussing every month. There will be impromptu and pop-up live sessions. There will be specific content and lives for each of those sub-ponds. So I will be going live in just the manifestor group. I will be going live in just the generator, Mani-Gen, projector, to talk about things that are relevant for you in your energy to provide tools, training, etc. There is already a suite of bonus content that's been put in there. There is resources in there. Again, this is our space to play. There are chat rooms in different spaces for you to engage with other leaders and be in a conversation, because the overall objective of this community is engagement, integration, interaction, and connectedness. And so we grow, we amplify, and really can move into a space of ascension. And so when I think about some of the pillars of this community, it's about creating synergy. It's about creating collaborative opportunities. It's about creating a deep sense of connection and community. It's a space for us to be radically authentic and aligned as fuck. And it's a space for us to ascend into what is calling through each of us individually and what is needed collectively to shift consciousness and move us into the next evolution of humanity. So with that, I am so honored to be able to facilitate and create this space with you, and just deeply moved that that vision is finally coming to life in a way that feels really juicy and feels really powerful. And I hope to see you there. So I'll drop the link in the comments. If you have questions, reach out. Feel free to DM me. If this is the right fit for you, jump in, dive in. The water is awesome. It's perfect for us to start a movement to change the lens of leadership, business, and just the quality of our life and connection. So with that, this is Candy. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I love you. Happy Friday, the 13th. Tap into the magic, the mystery, and just the mysticism of what today brings. And I hope you manifest lots of amazing things to you as well. I will catch up with y'all later. Mwah. Talk to you soon.